because I know many of us do it from memory. So in the future, as we move forward with our Bible readings, the way that we will offer Thanksgiving is we'll say, God is still speaking, and we are still listening. Thanks to God. Friends, will you pray with me? Most holy and still speaking, God, we are still listening. We are trying our best to listen each and every day, oh God, to follow in the way that you have set forth for us. We'll give you thanks for your continued presence in this community. May the words of my mouth and the meditation of each and every heart be acceptable to you, O God, our rock and our redeemer. Amen. Amen. So friends, last week we talked a little bit about the prophet Amos. We're going to continue with him this week. But I want us to recap a little bit from what we talked about last week briefly, kind of refresh our memories. So after the death of King Solomon, the large kingdom that Solomon and his father, King David, had united and come to rule, split into two separate kingdoms. The northern part was called the northern kingdom of Israel, and the southern part was the kingdom of Judah. Now each one had its own capital, Jerusalem in the south, Samaria in the north. They had their own temples, they had their own customs, their own kings. For the most part, they were two separate nations. But both of them claimed the faith of Moses. And both of them professed faith in the one God. Now, in the midst of all of this, Amos was called by God to be a prophet to God's people. He was called from a small little village in the south of the southern kingdom of Judah. Now, the message that God had given to the prophet, had given to Amos to deliver, was for the people in the northern kingdom of Israel. So if the job for a prophet's not hard enough, God sent Amos to what was basically a foreign country to tell them what they had done wrong. Now, few of us, I think both then and now, like to be confronted with our sins. Few of us, both then and now, like to be reminded when God is displeased with us. And I know that we especially don't like it when a stranger comes into our house, into our country, to tell us what we've done wrong. And that is the situation on the ground before Amos begins his prophecies, before Amos begins his preaching and teaching. Now, in the chapter preceding this, Amos chapter 5, the prophet tells the people what they should have done, what they could have done, what they would have done had they obeyed the laws of Moses. And he recounts a lot of that. And then in the reading that we heard Deb read today, because they have not done the shoulda, woulda, couldas, Amos is letting them know what the consequences will be. The consequences for their sins, the consequences for their misdeeds. So in other words, Amos is saying, you knew what you were supposed to do. You didn't do it. God is angry. God has been gracious and kind up until this point, trying to give you time to turn things around. But you haven't done that, and you don't seem to have any care to do that. So now, and this is chapter 6, God is going to offer retribution. God will punish you, Israel, for not following God's will. And throughout this book, the prophet names numerous sins, but Amos is primarily focused. He's primarily concerned with the sins of... Let me back up. He's primarily concerned with what wealth and power and money can do to people. And he's primarily concerned with rebuking the acclamation of wealth. Now, I'm a big fan of the History Channel. I'm assuming that there are many of you who are as well. There's at least one. And I'm especially fond of biblical archaeology shows. I just think they're neat. And as you might expect, or maybe even hope from your pastor, I have a deep interest in the history of the ancient lands where a lot of our Bible stories took place. But I do have some objections to these things as well. My objections to these shows is that people will often look to the archaeological evidence as some sort of proof. But our faith can't be proven. And that's why it's called faith. Archaeologists can often give us evidence of things that took place in the past and can even confirm some of the information in our Bibles, but they cannot, they should not, nor should they even be expected to be, to give us some sort of proof. Because our faith doesn't need to be proven. Our faith is not a textbook. From beginning to end, our Bible is a story of humanity's relationship with God and our relationship with each other and how to live in right relationship with God and with each other. Our Bible is basically a guide to right living. Now, the next 2 weeks, next Sunday and the Sunday after, we're going to explore a 2-part series on doubt. So I would invite you, if you have ever doubted your faith, if you ever think that you will doubt your faith in the future, know that you are not alone, and we'll talk about this in the sanctuary in the coming weeks. So anyway, kind of our archaeological evidence tells us something very interesting about the northern kingdom of Israel specifically. Now, the capital of the northern kingdom at this time was the city of Samaria, which we know from the story of the Good Samaritan. In covering the homes, the houses in the city of Samaria in the 9th and 10th centuries before Christ, it was discovered that all of the homes were about the same size, and they were all located in about the same part of the city. So basically, they had a neighborhood where pretty much everyone lived, and everyone lived in pretty much the same size home. We can look at this as evidence that the laws that were given to the people in the book of Moses, what today we claim as the first 5 books of our Bible, the laws set out a model for egalitarian living, for living in equality with each other, for treating each other fairly. And we can see with these homes that this is kind of being lived out, at least in some parts, that they were honoring each other and respecting kind of an economic equality. Now, if we fast forward a century or two to the homes in the 8th century, the time when Amos was preaching. Now, in the 8th century, they've uncovered with the archaeology and their digging and how they do this, that there were a smaller group of very large homes that were set apart from the regular size homes of the average people. So this tells us that there were a small group of people that had begun to collect money and wealth and power, to concentrate it among themselves. And in Samaria, the rich were no longer living out this model of equality. They lived in these very large homes that were set apart from where everyone else lived. Now, the prophet Amos is telling us that this concentration of wealth, this concentration of money and power, it was taking place in Samaria, but also in Jerusalem. So even the people in the southern kingdom of Judah were complicit in this. Amos goes on to say that they had beds made of ivory, which has actually been uncovered in the archaeology as well, that they spent their time lounging around, doing nothing. They ate fine meat at their meals. The well-to-do had a lifestyle that was beyond what most people could dream of. Now, one of the things that we know about then and now is that God is an active agent in our lives. God was not blind to what was going on in this accumulation of all this wealth. The separation of people that based on this wealth and this money was never what God intended for God's people. But God granted us so graciously that pesky little gift of free will that we have that so often can get in our way, at least our downfall. So what happens then? What goes on? What does Amos say is going to happen? there's some hints that Amos is giving the people prophetic warning rather than saying for sure what will happen. Amos spends a long time pointing out the sins that come from wealth. But the destruction that Amos actually prophesies only happens a generation later. So he's saying God is going to punish, and that does happen, but it comes 20, 30 years later. So it seems like the people did not listen to Amos. They ignored him. They didn't get their act together. And when we think about that, did he actually expect them to? Do we, in this day and time, have a realistic expectation that the rich and powerful and wealthy in our society will share their wealth and power and money in order that they and we can have a proper relationship with God? Now, I want us to be clear about what Amos is saying here, because Amos is walking a very fine line. So to really balance what he's saying, he's not saying that money is bad. Amos is not saying that living in a big house is bad. Amos is not saying that taking care of ourselves with the things that we have earned and that we've accumulated is bad. What Amos is doing, Amos is pointing out that money and wealth and power can easily lead us to ignore our responsibilities. And the responsibilities that I'm talking about are our religious obligations that God has set forth for us. Taking care of the needy, feeding the poor, always acting in favor of justice. Those are God's expectations for us. Wealth and money and power can often do make us complacent in our duty to help the needy. Now again, these things are not inherently bad, but what they do to our spirits, to our hearts and our minds and our souls is often harmful. Now this is why and you've heard me say this and you will hear me say this again, this is why I object so loudly and so often to the perversion that's taught in a minority of churches around this country, the prosperity gospel. Because our God blesses us, and that is for sure. But the very idea that God would bless a limited few with money and wealth and power is disgusting. It's perverse. It is not biblical. The idea that God would bless us with things that would cause us to neglect our capacity to help our neighbor is the most anti-Christian message I can think of. Now, ordinarily, I try to say things like that with a pastor's heart. Be a little kinder. But Amos is being bold, so I'm taking a hashtag pastor's prerogative to be a little bold as well. Because Amos is not pulling any punches in what he is saying. And I think that's why this is a hard message for us to hear, even thousands of years later. Amos is telling the people that they are doomed. You will be punished. And as the people were taught, and they believed that they were always first in God's eyes. Amos is telling the people, you are first in God's eyes. You will stay first in God's eyes. You will be first to be punished. You will be first to be exiled. You will be first to beg for forgiveness. Now, at Bible study a few days ago, someone remarked that they thought these words of Amos were talking directly to us in 2019. Now, how much of this do we see in our world today? How often do we see money and wealth and power make people complacent about doing the right thing? Now, income inequality, as we know, in this country is out of control and growing every day. Many workers in this country, some of you in this very room, did not make enough money working one job that you have to work 2 or 3 jobs. Now, sometimes, particularly on our television sets, we hear easy answers to these questions, simple answers, like the poor need to work more. The market force of capitalism are going to solve this issue, and so on. We hear those things, but there are not easy answers to this question, nor am I suggesting to proposing. But I do want us to be clear that capitalism will first off, we have a capitalist-like economy in the United States, blended with other economic systems. But capitalism at its core is not in harmony with the teachings of God in our Bible. And that statement rubs us all the wrong way, from me to you to everybody, because that's who we are as citizens of America, right? And that makes us feel bad. And I'm not standing up here trying to go back to my Southern Baptist roots, throwing out guilt. I'm just telling you what the prophet is teaching us. So it makes us uncomfortable to know that sometimes we have to choose our faith over our economy. And I don't have the solutions, and I'm not going to offer any solutions today. I want this to make us think, because I'm not an economist or a political leader. But I am your pastor and your teacher. So it is my job to point out to you the things that Amos is trying to teach us. Pointing out our communal sin and our own sin. But he has something Amos did not have. Not to negate the teachings from our Hebrew Bibles for our Jewish brothers and sisters, but we have a hope in the Christian community. The incarnation, life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. And Jesus has shown us the way to life, the way to live, the way to treat each other. Christians this world over study their Bible, work with people outside of their community, in and outside of their community, and love God, and we love each other. And that's who we are as Christians. But we often complicate so much of it, because Jesus made it really simple and really easy. Jesus said, if we love the Lord God with all of our hearts and all of our minds and all of our souls, and love our neighbor as ourselves, everything else will fall into place. And that's true. It is that simple. Even for theologians and pastors, and we complicate things and make things so dense and complicated. But it really is that easy. So my challenge for us is, let's do it as a community, as individuals. Let us not be like the people in that northern kingdom of Israel, ignoring the words of the prophet Amos, who were eventually conquered and scattered to the winds and disappeared in the pages of history. I say that we should try, even just for one day, to love the Lord God with all